Hey, everybody, this is Rod Meldrum, the Book of Mormon evidence guy. And I am really excited about this next couple of podcasts that we're going to be doing involving weather and climate and also animals, because they're all kind of interrelated here. And if you have ever wondered about snow in the Book of Mormon, if you've ever heard, that's probably the single most asked question ever that we've gotten as far as the Heartland Model geography is concerned is, well, if it happened here in North America, how come the Book of Mormon doesn't mention snow? Well, we're going to go into a deep dive on snow, weather, climate, and the animals and plants that would be associated with particular kinds of climates. And I think you're going to have a great time. This is going to be a fun adventure as we go through this. It's going to be a deep dive. Now, just for information's sake, I actually did an entire presentation on this in my first DVD set. It's called Book of Mormon Evidence number 5, the 5 DVD set. And this one has, in disc number 4, has Prophecies and Promises is number 1, Joseph Smith New number 2, the DNA research is number 3, and number 4 has introduction by Keith Merrill. Then we talk about weather and climate. We talk about the buffalo evidence and the chronological evidences, the tents and temples and teepees and Christ in the Americas. And anyway, and it goes into the whole weather and climate in a big way. So if you'd like to, we do have a few of these left. DVDs are kind of going the way of 8 tracks and cassettes. So anyway, if you'd like to get a copy of this, these we originally were doing these for $60. That's actually a 5 DVD set, about almost 9 hours, 8.5 hours of intensive research. It's kind of the foundations of the Heartland Model geography of the Book of Mormon. If you would like to pick those up, I think we're doing them for $10 now. So just blowing them out there. So if you'd like to get that, it was $60. If they're $10 on our website, you can just go to the bookofmormonevidence.org to the bookstore and check it out. Also, just want to just reiterate that we've got some tours coming up here for next year. One of them is going to be one of my exciting tours. It's going to be South Pacific Wonder. So we're actually going to be going to Australia and New Zealand. And so this is, if you'd like to tour with me, we had some tours this year. We've got one coming up here in just a couple of weeks as well. The chronology tour. It's kind of my favorite tour, actually, where we actually follow the Book of Mormon chronologically from when Lehi lands here in the Americas, basically in America, and then we follow that as they establish the land of Nephi, land of Zarahemla, and on up to the land Bountiful, and finally to the Hill Cumorah, which is where we finished the tour standing on top of the Hill Cumorah and overlooking those sacred battlegrounds. So this South Pacific Wonders is going to be January the 22nd to February the 8th. So just a little heads up about that. If you'd like to go with me on a tour, that'd be great. And also, we have the chronology tour next year in October. So you can go to Legacy Tours and Travel and get more information about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about weather and climate. And as I mentioned in the introduction here, probably the single most asked question when people hear about the Heartland models is, well, if the Book of Mormon happened here in North America, why didn't they mention snow? Why is there not any mention of snow? And actually, so that's a weather-related thing. Weather and climate, although they are very much related, weather is kind of more of a local phenomena, what's happening with the weather, but climate is what's happening kind of more of a regional phenomena. So what's happening regionally in a particular area. And the Book of Mormon has amazingly some pretty strong indicators of both of those things. But first off, let's just talk about the nature of the climate. So this is in Alma chapter 46, verse 40. It says, there were some who died with fevers, which at some seasons of the year. So that's an important part, because seasons of the year tells you something about their overall climate. There were seasons, which were very frequent in the land, but not so much so with fevers, because of the excellent qualities of the many plants and roots which God had prepared to remove the cause of these diseases to which men were subject by the nature of the climate. And I could add to that we are in the Book of Mormon. So the nature of the climate is that there were seasons of the year. And so what exactly constitutes seasons? Now, down in Central America, you have kind of 2 major seasons. You have kind of the rainy season and the dry season. So there are seasons there. But here in North America, we have distinct seasons: spring, summer, winter, fall. And so these seasons are quite distinct as far as seasons are concerned. But the funny thing about this is actually in the Book of Mormon, it does actually mention snow, at least a couple of different times. And it also mentions hail, which is a different form of frozen water, if you will, than snow. But snow is actually specifically mentioned here in 1 Nephi chapter 11, verse 8. Now, some people would say, well, wait a minute. Okay, so they're not talking about it snowing here. This is what it says. It says, "It came to pass that the Spirit said unto me, look." So this is Nephi when he was in his dreams or his visions that he was having. It says, "And I looked and beheld a tree. It was like unto the tree which my father had seen, and the beauty thereof was far beyond, yea, exceeding of all beauty, and the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow." Now I want to make a little emphasis here. What's he doing here? So both Lehi and Nephi saw this dream. And, both Lehi and Nephi had this vision, the same vision, and they were talking about the whiteness of the driven snow. There's not that many things in nature that are really pure white. In fact, I was just up behind my home here a couple of days ago and noticing how white the bark of aspen trees is. But even so, it's still kind of a milky white. It's not really a bright white. So if you were trying to describe exceedingly whiteness, okay, snow is one of the best natural colorants, basically, if you will, that you could actually relate to. Now, the interesting thing, people say, well, wait a minute, but they're coming from Jerusalem. How would they know what snow looks like if they came from Jerusalem? And the answer is actually, it does actually snow in Israel, not very often, and it doesn't last for very long, but it has actually snowed in Israel, in Jerusalem specifically, and so they would have known what snow is. But he's not saying that they actually experience snow. What he's saying is basically they're trying to describe the whiteness, but it wouldn't make any sense for Lehi or Nephi or the Lord, for that matter, to be talking about how white snow is if he knew that the descendants of Lehi were never going to experience it. They were never going to know what snow looks like if they were in Central America, where it doesn't snow down in the valleys. Now, it does snow up in the mountains, of course, in Central America, but not down in the valleys. But here in North America, they would experience snow all the time. But this is an interesting little descriptor of how this snow was. It wasn't just exceed the whiteness of snow. It said the whiteness of driven snow. And how would snow be driven? Well, it'd obviously be some kind of a major storm. I'm going to be relating a lot of things as we go through this discussion about weather and climate and the animals in the Book of Mormon. With the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, I've marked some of the different places where we have these things, and I want to share with you a few of these thoughts here when it comes down to the weather and climate. So let me see here. I'm going to find this driven snow as it talks about that. Okay. So this is, if you have your annotated edition of the Book of Mormon handy, it's on page 16. And this is, again, talking in regard to the driven snow here. It says, Nephi recorded the description of his previous vision of the tree of life. He says, quote, "As I looked and beheld the tree, and the beauty thereof was far beyond, yea, exceeding of all beauty, and the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow." Nephi was addressing his own people after having separated from the Lamanites, and he wrote this description on the small plates of Nephi, which he was commanded to make 40 years after arriving in the Promised Land. It was 30 years after he made the large set of plates, which were used by his father Lehi to record his history and visions. Nephi's children and grandchildren never lived in Jerusalem. The Nephites were living in the land choice above all others, where driven snow must have been common in order for them to understand the analogy of whiteness of the driven snow. An expression not found in Hebrew scripture. That's not found in any Hebrew scriptures, as the driven snow. As an example, Isaiah wrote, "Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow," a passage that was written on the plates of brass in the book of Isaiah. That's from 118. Nephi did not write that ye shall be as white as snow. Nephi instead wrote, "The whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow." So in other words, the children and grandchildren of Nephi must have had experienced something similar to a blizzard. snow that's driven by strong winds. Nephi may have experienced this weather condition in the Promised Land or after living there for 40 years. He knew that the generations of his people would understand the specific description as an analogy of the whiteness of the fruit of the tree of life. Nephi was commanded to God to write on the small plates for the ministry of my people, suggesting this unique and specific analogy would have a meaning for them specifically. And by comparison, Nephi records that his father Lehi saw in the vision while in the Arabian wilderness, yea, and I beheld that the fruit thereof was white, to exceed all the whiteness that I had ever seen. The phrase whiteness of the driven snow in Nephi's description, recorded 40 years after arriving in the Promised Land, suggests that he lived somewhere in North America where seasonal blizzards drive the snow, and provide an analogy that has special and understandable meaning for those who witness driven snow or snow driven by strong winds. And when it comes down to the driven snow, that is, there's several things in regard to that, but let me just talk about, for example, the hail. So this is from Helaman, chapter 5, verse 12. And again, he's not talking about hail actually happening, but it doesn't make sense to use an analogy that your children's children would never experience and would have no idea what the analogy meant if you talked about things that they wouldn't experience. So as this is in verse 12, it says, "And it is upon the rock of our Redeemer, who is Christ, the Son of God, that ye must build your foundation. That when the devil shall send forth his mighty winds, yea, his shafts in the whirlwind," we're going to talk about that, okay, "yea, when all his hail and his mighty storm shall beat upon you, it shall have no power over you." So that's involving hail as well. Both are phenomenons that require temperatures dropping below the freezing point, which rarely, if ever, happens in Central America. But here in North America, obviously, we have an entire seasons of the year, the end of the fall, all winter, and the beginning of spring, when we have those phenomena happening here in North America. So I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of thoughts about snow. But another one that I find is kind of interesting and kind of funny, actually, is people go, well, but it never mentions it actually snowing. And so I say, well, actually, where did the Book of Mormon mention rain? Because if it happened down in Central America, you'd think there'd be a lot of mention of this wet season, which just lasts for months and months, and basically everything just is soaked almost every single day it rains. You would think that would be mentioned as well, but it turns out that rain and snow are not something that was apparently important enough to take up the valuable room on the plates. They didn't. Maybe it was Mormon or Moroni that decided, I'm not going to leave all the weather, the weather accounts, and leave those in the book, because it's just not that important and that critical. But there are some interesting aspects of that I want to talk for you just a second. So let me see here. Find my little part here. So, okay. One of the other aspects of this is people say, well, in the Book of Mormon, they talked about people living in tents, all the way from Lehi and his family when they left Jerusalem, and then they dwelt in tents until they got to the seashore, to the Iriantum, basically the great deep, and then they built the ship and they sailed to America. And then for several times during over the course of the Book of Mormon saga, they talked about living in tents. Now, this is interesting because people say, well, how could people survive living in tents in the heartland of America? I mean, wouldn't it be too cold? And the answer to that is actually they weren't having any problems living in places like Montana and Wyoming and anywhere up in Canada in their teepees. And what is a teepee? Basically, it's a tent, right? So people did not have any problems living in cold climates in the wintertime in tents. That's how many of them did. The Plains Indians all lived in tents for generation after generation. They were doing that. So, but one of the big other things that people bring up all the time is, well, okay, so, but the Book of Mormon says that they had hot weather. And it's true. It actually does talk about this. So let me just explain to you. This scripture has been used and parlayed into the basis for an understanding of the Book of Mormon happening in a tropical climate. So we're going to address that real quick because I don't see that this is the case, and in fact, I'm going to show you many reasons why that's not the case. But this is from Alma chapter 51. This is when Teancum, they were having a war. Teancum steals into the camp of Amalickiah. And so this is verse 33 says, "And it came to pass that when the night had come, Teancum and his servant stole forth and went out by night and went into the camp of Amalickiah. And behold, sleep had overpowered them because of their much fatigue, which was caused by their labors and the heat of the day." Now, this is the only reference in the Book of Mormon that describes a warm day. Okay, and that's basically all it says. It was a heat of the day. The idea of the Book of Mormon happening in a tropical climate was actually derived from this. So, is it possible that this is the heat of the day thing actually means that? And part of the reason for this is that because when this actually happened, let me find that real quick here. We address this in the Annotated Book of Mormon. Okay, let's see. There we go. So this is I've got my little notes here going on. I want to just share with you, this is such an important one. And actually, I've had people who've talked about this before in some articles. Daniel Peterson, in fact, did an article a few years back about may your New Year's start better than Amalickiah's did. That's the reason for this in just a second. But anyway, so essentially what happened is that this is verse 34, "And it came to pass that Teancum stole privily into the tent of the king and put a javelin to his heart, and he had caused the death of the king immediately, that he did not awake his servants. And he returned again privily to his own camp, and behold, his men were asleep, and he woke them and told them all the things that had happened. And he caused his armies to stand in readiness," and so forth. So, and now, this is chapter 1 of verse 52 of Alma. "And now it came to pass in the 26th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi, behold, when the Lamanites awoke on the first morning of the first month," so this is the very beginning of their year, "behold, they found Amalickiah was dead in his own tent, and they also saw Teancum was ready to give battle on that day." So this is basically the first month of the first year, which is obviously it's January 1st, right? No. Okay. They were not using the same calendar system that we use, the Gregorian calendar system. They had a calendar system that was given to them by God. It was a Hebrew calendar system, and it was a lunar-based calendar system. And the beginning of they had 2 actual years, the beginning and ending of 2 years. There's the kind of the main cultural year, and there's a governmental one as well. But both of them essentially start in the spring of the year, in the springtime of the year, sometime in April usually, because it has to do with the moon cycles, and when the full moon and so forth happen, when the new moon's happening. Anyway, so that is an interesting factor because we're not talking about January 1st here. We're talking about sometime in April. And so this is what we have in page 318 in the Annotated Book of Mormon. So if you want to grab your Annotated Book of Mormon, check it out. Page 318. It says, "What was the nature of the climate of the Book of Mormon? One long-standing question has been that of snow. If the Book of Mormon lands were in North America, why was there no mention of snow? But actually, snow and hail are mentioned, as I said before, and both rain and heat are mentioned in 7 verses. Twice rain is mentioned as having occurred, once by the Nephites. That's in Helaman chapter 11, verse 17. So it actually rained on the Nephites once in their 1,000-year history. I don't think anybody's thinking that that's an indication of climate just because it rained one time. And then also once by the Jaredites in Ether chapter 9, verse 35, it talks about it rained once on the Jaredites. And all other references are speaking in prophecy or by metaphor, okay? There are 3 instances of observed normal weather phenomenon. Only 2 mention the most common, that of rain. Only once is a hot day mentioned, and that's occurring in Alma chapter 51, verse 33, which we just read. And this solitary reference has formed the foundation upon which many have speculated about the climate of the Book of Mormon. For this one verse, it has been surmised that a tropical climate is indicated by the text. But does the text justify such an assumption? Assuming that the term heat of the day refers to the outdoor temperature of that particular day, the timing of the battle is important for context, and thus ended the 25th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. The Nephites' lunar calendar meant that the end of their year was the beginning of spring on their observed Jewish calendar. Okay, so that's page 308 if you want to refer to the Jewish calendar there in the Annotated Book of Mormon. Weather patterns may have been different anciently, so it may not have been unusual to experience warm temperatures in the Midwestern states in April, the beginning of the Jewish New Year. Even so, temperature data shows that Cleveland, Ohio, for example, a city noted for its cold winters, records highs of 83 degrees Fahrenheit in March in 1945 and 88 degrees Fahrenheit in April of 1986. So clearly 88 degrees, almost 90 degrees, is warm enough to be considered a warm day or a hot day, especially if you're just coming out of winter and you've kind of been a little more sedentary and haven't been really exerting yourself too much, and then you come out of the springtime and all of a sudden you're exerting yourself in a battle, and it's 88 degrees and it's hot. You're gonna be much fatigued by that. Similarly, weather almanacs for St. Louis, Missouri, for the month of April have recorded average high temperatures of 67 degrees and record high temperatures of 93 degrees. Therefore, it is quite possible that Teancum found Amalickiah much fatigued due to an unseasonably warm day at the end of the 25th year of the reign of Judges, in March or April of 67 BC. There's no reason to assume a tropical climate is necessitated by the text when all that would be required is any number of warm, sunny days in the spring in the North American heartland. So then we have a table here that shows the average, the low, and the record high temperatures for St. Louis, Missouri. And in April, the record high is 93 degrees in 2002. So at 93 degrees, I think you'd, if you're all dressed up with your have your weapons and so forth with you, and if you're a Nephite and had armor and so forth, you could be very much fatigued and so forth from that. So there's no reason why the Book of Mormon has to be in a tropical climate. That's the bottom line. There's lots of indications that are otherwise. So this is just talking a little bit about this previous battle was in the last day of the Nephite year. And wouldn't it be too cold to wear a loincloth? They actually said that they were wearing loincloths in January in the Mississippi River Valley, which brings me to this fun article. And it's actually quite a clever article. It was written here by Dan Peterson. This is back in 2011. It was published in the Deseret News. And he said, may your new year begin better than Amalickiah's. Because Amalickiah's new year obviously did not go so well as he was killed. Anyway, so now the interesting thing is that Dan Peterson is a major advocate. He was formerly with Farms and is a major advocate of the Central America, Mesoamerica theories. And so he basically says we're approaching this in the new year, and he says many readers are familiar with words that dominate the last portion of the book of Alma, and many know the story in particular. And he basically tells the story. He says, notice that the opposing armies are both soundly asleep, owing at least partially to the toil exacted by them by heavy exertions in hot, draining weather. But notice, too, when this story happens. And thus ended the 25th year of the reign of the Judges, and thus end the days of Amalickiah. That is, Teancum killed Amalickiah on New Year's Eve at the close of a very hot and fatiguing day. What can we conclude from this? It's virtually certain either that the story didn't occur in upstate New York or the upper Midwest, or that the Nephites followed a different calendar than we do, or perhaps both. Now, I know Dan Peterson. I know he's very much smart enough to know that it's not the first one. Basically, it's the second one. The calendar, Nephite calendar, wasn't the same as ours. Nevertheless, he takes the opportunity to take a shot at the Heartland model and says, average December to January temperatures in Rochester, New York, which is the farthest north reaches of the Heartland model, whereas most of the model actually, we were talking about happens in the Mississippi River Valley and the Ohio River Valleys, not up in New York. He says the nearest large city to Joseph Smith's Palmyra ranged between 36 and 16 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by an average of 2 feet of snow per month. And as I write this, it's a relatively balmy 38 degrees in Rochester and overcast. In mid-April, when the first month of the Jewish calendar begins, high temperatures in Rochester average roughly about 55 degrees, while the nights drop very nearly to freezing. But that scarcely qualifies as hot. Anyway, so he's basically just saying that it couldn't be in New York because it would be too cold. But then, as we just also described, there's no reason to think that it didn't happen in New York or in the heartland, I should say, because most of the Book of Mormon was happening in the Mississippi River Valley, and it's plenty warm enough for a warm day or a hot day in the Mississippi River Valley in April. So anyway, so he's talking about anyway, that's pretty much the basis of that. So I wrote a response to that, and it's on our website if you want to take a look at that. But I also wanted to address a couple of other quick things. So the calendaring here, we want to just briefly touch on that, because what was the Nephites' calendaring? Well, we know that the calendaring actually came from the Hebrews, which was given to them by the Lord, and the Jewish Passover is celebrated at the first full moon after the vernal equinox. So that's usually in mid-April. Interestingly enough, Christ observed the Passover just prior to his being crucified. So we have a time frame where we know that Christ was over in Jerusalem just before the crucifixion, and he observed Passover. So we know when that was. And then we also know in the Book of Mormon, at the same time as Christ's death, they were talking about their timing of this. And this is 3 Nephi chapter 8, verse 5. It says, "It came to pass in the 34th year, in the first month, on the 4th day of the month, that's when there arose this great storm, such an one as has never been known in all the land." We're gonna do another deep dive podcast on that here coming up in the next very shortly, going into the destruction around the time of Christ's death, because that is really critical to understand. That so many people have thought that that's a volcanic eruption of some sort, even though there's no mention of volcanoes anywhere in the Book of Mormon. Clearly, the word volcanoes was in Joseph Smith's vocabulary, because they had gone through the year without a summer and so forth from the volcanoes that went off around Joseph Smith's time. So he would have been familiar with that, and plus the Lord would have been familiar with that term or any terms that directly relate to volcanoes. For example, lava. For example, huge plumes. There's descriptors that describe a volcano that are simply not in the record of the Book of Mormon as it relates to the destruction that happened in 3 Nephi. But this gives us a time frame where we can actually connect the two, the Hebrew calendar system and the Book of Mormon, and they're still using the same calendar system. Okay, meaning that the first month is going to be sometime in April. So if Christ died in April, and that is when the Nephites observed the corresponding calamities, then the Nephite first month was also in April, and that just makes sense because we can actually correlate the two of them together. So weather almanacs, month of April, we already talked about this really quickly, but the record high temperature of 93 degrees in St. Louis, Missouri. So clearly that's a warm day. Now let me talk about one other aspect of this. This is actually from Mark Eubanks. He's a dear friend. He and his wife went on a tour with me back to see the Book of Mormon lands, and it was so much fun to have Mark Eubanks. Now, those of you who don't know who Mark Eubanks is, his son actually is the weather forecaster for KSL TV. And he was the weathercaster for many, many years. As I grew up, he was the weathercaster, and he had this kind of a white jacket he would wear when it was going to be when snow was coming. He would wear this white jacket, and you knew if he walked out on the set in his white jacket, you knew it was going to be snow coming. But he came on the tour. It was so much fun to have him on with the tour with us, and hopefully if he's watching this, that he'll see it's kind of fun. Every morning he would get up and give a weather forecast of where we're going on the tour coach as we were going to different places. But anyway, so he ended up writing an article about weather in the Book of Mormon from a meteorological standpoint. So as a meteorologist, he knows a lot about different kinds of weather and things. And so he started to do a deep dive in the Book of Mormon. And he said potential weather or weather-related words that were examined. So he looked up each of these words in the Book of Mormon: burn, carried away, climate, cloud, cold, cool, dew, dry, dust, famine, flood, fog, freeze, frozen, hail, heat, ice, lifting, lightning, mild, mist, mud, rain, rainbow, sand, season, shine, shower, smoke, storm, snow, sun, sunshine, temperature, tempest, thunder, tracks, weather, warm, and weather, and whirl, and whirlwind, and wind. And all of those words he looked up. and got all the references and put them all together to kind of find out what we could glean from these words and these weather-related phenomena in the Book of Mormon. So these are potential weather words. It says of 42 weather words researched, there were only 22 that appeared in the text and actually pertained to weather. So only 22 of them actually are in the text of all those words that he did. Some of these words include, for example, the word burn, about cities being burned, and implies that cities were made of mostly wood or material that burns. Carried away is an interesting one because it only occurs once in the Book of Mormon, but it's at the time of Christ's crucifixion, where people were actually carried away in what? In a whirlwind. And what is a whirlwind? It's a tornado. It's clearly a tornado. So it says, the scripture states that they were carried so far away that no one knew where they went. This would imply an extremely strong wind. Most people cannot stay standing in a sustained wind of 100 miles per hour. Category 2 hurricanes have winds in this range, but Category 3 whirlwinds are strong enough to move people, but they would tend to be rolled and blown along the ground. To be carried away implies a lifting force along with the wind, such as found in strong tornadoes. An EF4 tornado has winds in the 200 to 250 mile per hour range. Humans can easily become airborne at that force. An EF5 tornado is roughly in the 250 to 300 miles per hour range. People have been known to be carried a mile by severe tornadoes, and even farther. No one has ever been known to survive a tornado journey of that distance. While an EF4 or EF5 tornadoes occur approximately once a year in the United States, they have never been known in Mesoamerica. And so that brings me. Let me go into just a little bit more about. There's two aspects of this that are really fascinating here. Okay, whoops. Put this back over here. Okay, and that's involving tempests and whirlwinds. Okay, so these are more climate-related things, okay? But the tempests and whirlwinds are fascinating because you have, so this is on page 393 in the Annotated Book of Mormon. And this is talking about 3rd Nephi. So this is actually the destruction that's happening in 3rd Nephi. Now, is it possible that God could have just changed all the weather to make this happen a lot bigger than what was normal or standard climate-related phenomena in the heartland, or is it just something that was actually would occur kind of more naturally? And I think the answer to that is it makes more sense, and you don't have to invoke God basically, going down and specifically changing the weather if you place it in the right place, and that is Tornado Alley. So everyone knows that in the Midwestern part of the United States, the heartland of America, and where we are saying the Book of Mormon actually took place, that we have what's called Tornado Alley. Now, tornadoes, they are interesting. Now, we have a map here that involves tornadoes and so forth in the Book of Mormon, and in that map, it basically shows world tornadoes and agricultural areas. There's a definite correlation between the two because tornadoes need moisture to feed their parent thunderstorms and the instability associated with spring and summer warming. Crops need moisture to grow and the temperature variation associated with changing seasons. Both conditions for tornadoes and agricultural growth are found in some areas as shown in the map on the left. So that's basically where it's showing that there's green dots with green areas, which are agricultural areas in the world. The heartland of the United States is one of the biggest ones, and then you have red dots, which is where tornadoes happen. So this is the location there. It turns out that the actual climatic conditions that are necessary to have tornadoes even happen doesn't even happen down in Central America. You have to have warm, wet, has to be changing seasons, have to have these massive thunderheads and so forth that cause this. But there's never been even an EF1 tornado recorded in Central America. But like he says here, I mean, every year there's at least one or two EF4 and EF5 tornadoes that happen in the United States. In fact, I'm going to just share one with you. On May 11th of 2011, there was a massive Category EF5 tornado near the town of Joplin, Missouri. It sucked an 18-year-old boy from the sunroof of his vehicle. Authorities found him some distance from where the vehicle was shattered. So That was a pretty devastating situation. He actually got in it. It actually pulled him through the sunroof of the car. And then now there was one in Joplin I had heard, and I haven't been able to verify it, but they found this guy was sitting in his home, apparently, and the home was completely leveled, and they couldn't find him or his body anywhere, and they found it almost 60 miles away in a lake about a week later. So his body had been actually brought up into the vortex of the tornado and hauled away, and literally had been carried away by the whirlwind. So devastating tornadoes capable of literally carrying people away, as described in 3rd Nephi, occur seasonally in what is termed Tornado Alley of North America's heartland. The whirlwind could mean tornado. That whirlwind means tornado is understood. Whirlwinds are mentioned seven times in the Book of Mormon. That's 2nd Nephi chapter 26, verse 5. The whirlwind shall carry them away. Mosiah chapter 7, verse 30. Alma 26, 6. Helaman 5:12, which talks about shafts in the whirlwind. And I want to talk a little bit more about that too, because the shafts in the whirlwind is just a fascinating thing. This is also here by meteorologist Mark Edwin Eubank, and this is he talks about, and now my sons, this is verse 12 of Helaman chapter 5. So Helaman chapter 5:12. So now my sons, remember that is upon the rock of our Redeemer, who is Christ the Son of God, that ye must build your foundation. And that when the devil shall send forth his mighty winds, yea, his shafts in the whirlwind, yea, when all his hail and his mighty storm shall beat upon you, it shall have no power over you to drag you down to the gulf of misery and endless woe, because of the rock which you are built, which is the sure foundation, a foundation whereupon if men build, they cannot fail or fall. So this is talking about shafts in the whirlwind. Now, as Mark Eubanks, as a meteorologist, was contemplating this, what does it mean to have shafts in the whirlwind? And I was thinking, if you've ever seen the movie Twister, or some of these tornado shows where like the tornado goes through a barn or something like that, or picks up a tree limb, or like a 2x4, and literally has so much force that the 2x4 just goes boom right through a barn wall or a home or something like that, because of the amount of force that has. These like arrows almost, or a shaft in the whirlwind would be stuck. I've seen like 2x4 stuck through a telephone pole, for example, images of that have happened from these EF 4 and 5 strong tornadoes. But as a meteorologist, he has a little bit different take on this. And this is fascinating, and most people would not have picked this up. But with his trained mind about weather phenomena and so forth, this is what he said. He says, shafts in the whirlwind is such an unusual description. It could refer to a number of things, but as a meteorologist, it's made me instantly think of severe tornadoes. Most tornadoes have a single vortex, but large and violent tornadoes can have multiple vortices. That is, they have small tornadoes rotating around the periphery of the main tornado. It is these smaller vortices that are so destructive and can carry people away. Helaman didn't say he was in such a tornado, but you would think his description would be something his audience could identify with. This phenomena is common in the central United States. And there's some images here on page 353 of multi-vortex tornadoes, where you have several smaller ones that are all going on their own, and then they all are encircled in a larger in the overall funnel. And so those are just, they have winds coming from basically every direction simultaneously, and it's just devastating, much more so than a single funnel tornado. And so we have an artist rendering of the three vortices within a large tornado, and there's a couple of photographs of a multi-vortex tornado which struck in Tushka, Oklahoma on April 14th of 2011. Another multi-vortex tornado in Oklahoma in 2013. So this shafts in the whirlwind, from a meteorological perspective, is a very unique and actually a kind of a qualifier. Where do we have these shafts in the whirlwinds, and where do we even have whirlwinds? And of course, Tornado Alley fits the bill perfectly for each one of those things. Okay. So let's move on to a few other things from him. So he talked about being carried away. Talked about cloud. The Lord stood in a cloud when he was talking to the Jaredites, and a cloud came between the people and Jesus when they couldn't see him in 3rd Nephi. It does talk about dew. Talks about being dry, dried reeds, dry wood, dry stalks, dry ground, dry bones. So there's lots of things there. Famine is mentioned several times in the Book of Mormon. It's a multi-year famine in Helaman. They talked about during the reign of Judges, they had a famine in Alma, chapter 62. Other famines and so forth. They're talked about floods. In Ether, this is in the Jaredite time frame. When the Jaredites crossed the ocean, the Lord sent the winds and the floods. Hail is mentioned again, like I said, twice. And that is that the Lord told Abinadi that he would send hail that would smite them. That's Mosiah chapter 12, verse 6. And Helaman said the devil would send hail. That's Helaman chapter 5, verse 12. So that sounds like that's actual hail that would have been experienced because it was smiting them specifically. Okay. The hail that could smite people may refer to the size of the hail itself or to the effects of the hail on crops. Hail of that description can occur in the tropics and the United States, although it is far more common in the United States heartland. Heat, talked about heat in the heat of the day. That's only the only single mention of a hot day or heat in the day. Lightning is talked about throughout the Book of Mormon, especially around the time of Christ's crucifixion. They talk about mists of darkness, mists were talked about. Rain, so these are the two occurrences of rain was in Helaman chapter 11, 13, and the Jaredites died because there was no rain, which is Ether chapter 9, verse 30. Again, it's hard to imagine no rain in either the Heartland or the Mesoamerican setting for the Book of Mormon, but anyway, a lack of rain can occur anywhere and any time. I talked about seasons of the year. He said, and he says some fruits that can have 2 seasons during the year. In the U.S. mainland, most fruits ripen during the summer. Grains are also grown in both areas and have seasons. Okay, that's talking about Central America and North America. Now, this is the one that we're going to talk about that goes into animals more. At the end of this, actually, it'll be a separate presentation, a separate podcast here. But we're going to be talking about animals and what does that indicate about climate? Because certain animals require certain types of climate to be able to survive, or they thrive better in certain climates. So we're going to talk about that. It says a beast usually refers to a mammal, often a large or dangerous one. If the beasts come at seasons, they would appear to be migrating either long or short distances. In the pre-industrial United States, a migrating large animal would probably refer to a bison. Wolves are considered beasts and sometimes travel with migrating animals. In Mesoamerica, the jaguar is a mammal is considered a beast, but they don't migrate. Most mammals in Mesoamerica don't migrate because of the moderate temperatures and year-round abundance of food. So there's no reason to migrate if you don't have seasons. If it's just wet and dry season, the animals don't have a reason to migrate like they do on the Serengeti and in Africa and whatever. They're migrating specifically because of the changing of the seasons. So in fact, there are no migrating beasts in Central America, but in North America we have at least one. Okay. At some seasons, there were conditions that brought frequent fevers, and we talked about that. He talked about smoke and the vapor of smoke. If the vapor of smoke is from a volcano, that condition could easily occur in Mesoamerica where there are volcanoes. We're going to talk about that in detail in the presentation on the destruction of around 3rd Nephi. However, it might also come from a massive eruption at the Yellowstone Park area with a smoke and ash cloud drifting into the central United States. If the vapor of smoke is from burning vegetation, both the United States and Mesoamerica have large forests, so either location is possible. But when it comes down to the smoke and the darkness, that is fascinating new stuff that you're going to love. It has to do with the New Madrid seismic zone and the events that took place there around the time of Christ's death. And we're going to talk about that in general. All right, so snow. We talked about snow pretty much in depth here. Storms, sun, tempest. There's the different ideas between a tempest and a, let me see if I've got that here. Well, just a tempest could be like a hurricane, and a whirlwind is like a tornado. So hurricane, and we know that hurricanes can reach high wind speeds as well, 150, up to 200 miles per hour, but they don't usually get up to the 300 miles per hour that a whirlwind can get. And hurricanes don't carry people away. They blow people across the ground, but they are not known to have actually lift people and carry them away like a tornado does. Talk about thunder and the people living high and flying with their flocks and herds were making tracks. So being able to track things, whirlwinds, and that's where we get into the whole whirlwinds. These whirlwinds are meteorologically different from tornadoes. Let's see. Let's read this part here from Mark Eubanks. There were numerous whirlwinds after Christ's death. If people are unrighteous, they will reap the chaff in the whirlwind. Some of the scriptures talk about whirlwinds carrying people away, and others talk about a whirlwind blowing chaff around. The whirling wind that blows chaff around is a good description of a fair weather whirlwind that occurs on warm days. These whirlwinds are meteorologically distinct from tornadoes. The whirlwinds that carry people away are a far different variety, ones that today we could call violent tornadoes. This kind of tornado hasn't been known to occur in Mesoamerica. In Mesoamerica, there can be violently erupting volcanoes that produce mixtures of pulverized rocks, ash, and hot gases. These pyroclastic foes can race down the volcano slopes at 50 miles an hour or more with temperatures over 400 degrees. Not only does this roll over everything, but it also smothers and incinerates objects in its path. Tornadoes have been known to form with these flows, but to have carried people away by them at the same time, the hot mixtures engulfing them, is highly contrary. While it is possible that this is what the scripture in 3 Nephi is describing, it would be a stretch. And then he talks about the shafts and the whirlwinds, and talking about these multi-vertices. Says Hillman didn't say he was in such a tornado, but you'd think his description would be something his audience would identify with. This phenomenon does not occur in Mesoamerica. It is common in the central United States. And he talks about winds, and the summary is, I think that this is the great summary here from Mark Eubanks, meteorologist for KSL TV for many, many years. It says, as it turns out, there are surprisingly few weather references used in such a long narrative as the Book of Mormon. Again, I don't think it was that important to put the weather in the book, but there were some things that couldn't be helped because there's things like plants and animals that help us to understand what type of climate it is that they were in. Since Mormon was abridging the records, it is possible he left out mention of the weather because it is so common and usually not important to the message. Weather conditions may have been somewhat different 2,000 years ago. That's also a possibility. So there may be danger in trying to assert that such and such happens here but not there. As an example, Native Americans indicate that many years ago, western New York State received far less snow than it does today. There's nothing unequivocal but after compiling and examining the weather terms referenced in the Book of Mormon, there are only two that hint or point at unique geography. Those describing whirlwinds and carried people away, and the description of beasts appearing in the land at certain seasons. Both of these occur modernly in the central United States, but not in Mesoamerica. Of course, as in many things, the exact wording and translation of the two weather references can be subject to interpretation. I'll leave it to you to decide if there's something compelling argument, or if there's a compelling argument for one or the other. So he was making an unbiased examination of the weather-related terms in the Book of Mormon and the climate-related things, and came to the conclusion that it makes the most sense. It's that you have to have the least amount of exceptions if you place the Book of Mormon in a North American setting where you have whirlwinds and you have migrating beasts and all the other things that go along with that. So, all right, are you hanging in there with me? Okay, there's a lot to go here. We're unpacking a lot of stuff here, but this is really a pretty, I think it's just a fascinating aspect of this whole thing. Now, many of you have had, and we've been out of these for about the last 2.5 years or so, the Exploring the Book of Mormon America's Heartland book. And in this book, I had a whole section on what seasons and climate. So you have seasons and climate in the Book of Mormon. This is talking about the seasons of the year. Talked about the Book of Mormon climate. Was it tropical? And goes into the whole thing about the snow and the rain and when that was actually done. Nephite calendar in thick clothing. By the way, if you have this book, you can look it up. It's on pages 86 through. There's the tempest and whirlwinds. Now, when I did this book, we didn't know. I hadn't met Mark Eubanks yet, and so we didn't know about the multi-vortices, whirlwinds. we didn't know about a lot of those things. But the next thing we're going to talk about here for just a second is the clothing mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Is there any indications of climate based on the clothing that they had and that they wore? And so let's go into that for just a minute. All right, clothing. So when it talks about clothing, Alma chapter 49, verse 6 says, Yea, and they had also prepared themselves with shields and with breastplates, and they had also prepared themselves with garments of skins, yea, very thick garments, to cover their nakedness. Now in Alma chapter 43, this is just prior to this, he says, And when the armies of the Lamanites saw that the people of Nephi, or that Moroni, had prepared his people with breastplates and arm shields, yea, and also shields to defend their heads, and also they were dressed with thick clothing. Now, thick clothing and thick garments is something that is really pretty fascinating when it comes down to that, because if you're down in Central America and you have basically two seasons, you have the wet and the dry season and so forth, why would you need to have thick garments? And I guess the answer to that would be because you're going to war. Okay, so I think if you're going to war, it makes sense to have thick garments. But then we also have these examples of the of where they came in nothing but a loincloth. Let me just address that for a little bit, because people say, well, wait a minute, it happened here in North America. These people were showing up to battle, in April, basically in a loincloth. And that's how could that be? If they were here in North America, it would be so cold, they would do that. But also one of the big questions that I had is how often do they actually wear loincloths? Because apparently it was kind of a shock to the Nephites that they even showed up in a loincloth. Because they're kind of like, oh, and guess what? They showed up in nothing but a loincloth, which kind of sounds like that the loincloth was the exception rather than the rule when it came down to what they were wearing as far as their garments. So their garments were primarily, the Nephite garments at least, were very thick. Later on, the Lamanites actually got a clue, and they actually began wearing thick garments as well, because they realized that it was just dumb to leave yourself totally exposed to the blows of the swords and the scimitars and the weapons of the Nephites. Whereas the Nephites at least had some amount of covering there. So this is another little fascinating part here that we're going to talk just briefly about. So this is on page 308, so 308 in the Annotated Book of Mormon. And it's a little bit of a longer thing here, but I think it's really important to understand that they prepared themselves with garments of skins, yea, thick garments. Okay. And now it came to pass in the 11th month. So this is now towards the end of their year, on the 9th of the 19th year, on the 10th day of the month, the armies of the Lamanites were seen approaching towards the land of Ammonihah. Okay, so that's what was going on here. Okay, so this is Alma chapter 49. And so Nephites are fortifying their cities, Ammonihah and Noah, and Mormon is making commentary here. It says, in the Book of Mormon, the 11th month, or Shabbat, is from mid-January to early February in the Nephite record, based on the dating of the Jewish calendar, starting with Nisan being the first month, as verified in 3 Nephi chapter 8, verse 5, where it states, and it came to pass in the 30th and 4th year, the first month, the 4th day of the month, there arose a great storm, and this was the sign of Jesus' death. The first day of the 7th month of Tishri was the Feast of Trumpets, which is in Leviticus chapter 23, verses 23 and 24. Therefore, the 10th day of the 11th month was during the winter months in North America, and the Lamanites' use of thick garments to cover their nakedness was an important battle strategy in order to protect themselves from both the cold weather and also from their battle weapons. A lesson they learned in the Zoramite War in the previous 18th year. And now I, Mormon, this is from Alma chapter 43, verses 3 and 4, and now that's Mormon, is talking here, returned to an account of the wars between the Nephites and the Lamanites in the 18th year of the reign of Judges. For behold, it came to pass that the Zoramites became Lamanites. Therefore, in the commandments of the 18th year, that is the early spring, the people of the Nephites saw the Lamanites were coming upon them. Therefore, they made preparations for war. Yea, they gathered together their armies in the land of Jershon. As this was the commencement of the Nephite year, the Lamanites came to battle sometime in late March or early April, dressed only with the girdle about their loins. So in March or April here, with nothing but a loincloth. This is from Alma chapter 43, verses 19 and 20. And when the armies of the Lamanites saw that the people of Nephi, or that Moroni, had prepared his people with breastplates and arm shields, and also with shields to defend their heads and the thick clothing, now the army of Zarahemnah was not prepared with any such thing. They had only their swords and their scimitars, their bows and their arrows, their stones and their slings, and they were naked, save it were a skin which was girded about their loins, yea, and all were naked, save it was the Zoramites and the Amalekites. With this understanding of Nephite reckoning of time using the pre-Babylonian Jewish calendar, along with Mormon's careful abridgment of the Nephite record that included comments on specific monthly events, it becomes apparent that the Nephites' use of thick clothing to protect themselves in the relatively warm commencement or first months of early March or April was a complete surprise to the less prepared Lamanites who previously had protected themselves with thick clothing in the usually colder winter months common in the North American heartland. So this is basically talking about that, and people going, well, but it's so cold, why would anybody wear a loincloth anytime? And we have to remind people of Samoset. Okay? So there's actually an interesting little history here. This is from the Mayflower, A Story of Courage, Community, and War. This is back in 2006 when it was published, but it says, on a cold March 16th of 1621 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, the English settlers were startled to see a Native American Indian approach them and with great enthusiasm speak the famous words, "Welcome, Englishmen." His name was Samoset, and he towered over them. He stood before them, a tall, straight man. What impressed them the most was that he was stark naked, with just a fringed strap of leather around his waist. When a cold gust of wind kicked up, one of the pilgrims was moved to throw his coat over the Indian's shoulders. But he was just fine, just wearing nothing, basically. This encounter shows that Native American Indian tribes could acclimatize to the colder months, even though non-natives, not accustomed to cold, needed to be fully clothed for protection from the cold gusts of wind. But Samoset had actually been captured and then had been taken to Europe. He actually was there for a few years, was able to get his way back to find his people gone. When he got back to America, his people had all been decimated by I think it was the smallpox. Anyway, so that's so the Native American people, they had no problem wearing just a loincloth, even in cold times. That was in March of 1621, which is about the same time frame that we're talking about here in the Book of Mormon, where the Lamanites showed up in nothing but a loincloth. So and these guys up in Plymouth, Massachusetts, were way further north than the Book of Mormon peoples here in the heartland of America in the Mississippi River Valley there. Okay, so now we've talked about a whole bunch of different things. We've talked about the weather, climate, whirlwinds, clothing, and so forth in the Book of Mormon, and the use of thick clothing, and all of it. I think, as you see this, does it point to a North American setting to you? I'm hoping that it does. It certainly does to me, and that's one of the other factors that we wanted to talk about. Now, I'm just going to just briefly go into some animals and so forth and just some indications there. For example, we have certain animals that don't do well in cold weather. And this goes a little bit into what Mark Eubanks was saying about, well, maybe the weather could have been a little bit different then, climate change. Okay. So when it comes down to climate change, that is something that does happen naturally. There are solar cycles that happen, and the weather and so forth will change over 50 years, and even there's 150-year cycles and so forth that go on. I'm not a big proponent of man-made climate change, although we may have some effect, but not something that was going to melt all the ice caps and so forth and cause global flooding. It is not as existential threat as so many people try to say, meaning that it's a threat to our very existence. I don't think that the oceans or the north and south polar caps could melt fast enough to make it so that people couldn't retreat back from the beaches if it was to make any change on the beaches. So it's just a scare tactic, I believe, to talk about that. Now, do things get warmer and cooler? Yes, they do. Based on the solar cycles, the sun has way more impact on our climate and weather than we humans can give ourselves credit for. So that's a little bit in regard to that. But there are indications that in the Book of Mormon time frames, and even after that, the climate of the heartland of America may have actually been somewhat warmer. Let me give you a couple of quick examples. For example, here we have the Carolina parakeet, which still existed back into the 1800s. The last one became extinct in 1918. They were officially declared extinct. But it's a parakeet. It's basically, like a parrot, in a lot of ways. We know that parrots and parakeets don't like cold weather. They can't handle the cold weather very, very well. But they were once common in southwestern Ohio. This is what they actually looked like. This is one that was taxidermied, so it's actually been preserved, so we actually can see what a Carolina parakeet used to look like. Okay, so the animals that we're going to be, I'm going to go into a lot more detail about the animals here in the next podcast that we're going to be doing, involving animals and how animals can actually indicate the geography of the Book of Mormon, and specifically because of their climate-related habitats. And so that's one thing that we're going to be talking about. I'm just giving you a couple of quick little examples here to show you what we're talking about as far as animals and habitat and what that might be doing. So this is the Carolina parakeet. Also, as you see behind me over here, on my left side over here, your right, I have it's a replica of a Hopewell mound builder. Now they call it a falcon, but if you take a look at the beak of this thing, it's clearly a parrot. It's a parrot-looking beak. Where they're parrots in the time frames of the Book of Mormon, parrots are not specifically mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but they are in copper effigies that were left by the mound builders, who we believe to be the Nephites of the Book of Mormon. And so parrots. Now this was actually found in a mound in Ohio. I believe it was Sipe Mound that was actually found, and it's actually and the original one is actually in the museum there in the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park in Chillicothe, Ohio. So this is an image of this parrot, and what does that indicate? Well, if you have parrots and parakeets, the chances are pretty good that the climate and the weather were quite a bit warmer back in the time frames of the Book of Mormon, because they don't exist here today. Now, the parakeets were actually hunted to extinction, but the parrots, they didn't find parrots in the southern states of the United States. So they had already left or had been exterminated earlier, or something had happened to the parrots that were there, because they clearly knew what a parrot was. Anyway, so the whole situation here is that we have different plants and animals and so forth, and are there any other indicators of climate? And we're going to go into that in a much bigger fashion here. Let me just see there. Yeah, so we're going to talk about plants and animals and how that relates to weather and climate in our next podcast. So I hope that you're enjoying this information. There's a lot to kind of put together here. But I think that you're going to see that the answers still keep coming. Now, we've got a new book that's going to be coming out called Book of Mormon Answers, that also goes along with our website, Book of Mormon Answers, as well. It's a part of our main website. But I think you're going to see that the truths of the Book of Mormon are continuing to come out. We're seeing more and more of these things that were thought to be anachronisms, or things that were out of place in time and space and whatever, are actually accurate. Joseph Smith was not making this story up, and actually, even though many things that he said, or that he wrote in the Book of Mormon, as he translated, were anachronistic in the sense that nobody knew, for example, about horses and elephants and those kinds of things. And the Book of Mormon was published, and then it's only been since that time that these things have been vindicated. So we're excited about sharing this information with you. I hope you're enjoying this, and that this has been a big help. If you don't have a copy of the Annotated Book of Mormon, I highly recommend that you get a copy of that, so you can go through and see these things. I've just, but you see all the all the little yellow tabs there. That's just for the things that I'm talking about here in this podcast here. So we're going to be talking about one last thing here that I did not mention. It's actually kind of cool. Okay, and this is actually in Mosiah chapter 7, verses 30 and 31. It talks about that. If it says, and again he saith, if my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the east wind, which bringeth immediate destruction. So there's something about this east wind. Now that would only be, it only makes sense in a particular area where an east wind would bring destruction. Because if you go all around the world, an east wind doesn't necessarily mean destruction. But if you take a look at here on page 157 in the Annotated Book of Mormon, and take a look at the paths of hurricanes and their history, whenever they're along the East Coast and the heartland of America, whenever you have really terrible hurricanes that happen, the wind patterns across the United States are primarily from the west towards the east. But when these hurricanes come in, they come up from the south and come up to the south, and they blow to the east, and then they go east and north. So they actually come in from the east and then out to the north. And this has the patterns and so forth from all of these different hurricanes throughout history. There's the image right here. So you can see they come in from the south, they go up through the Gulf of Mexico and Florida, and then up and out. So they go to the east. So these east winds that talked about as bringing sudden destruction. So let's see. After receiving Ammon, the missionary and descendant of King Zarahemla, King Limhi sent a proclamation among all his people, and thereby they might gather themselves together to the temple to hear the words that each should speak. He had gathered his people at the lavish temple that his father King Noah had built. Ammon had come with others to find those who had left Zarahemla many years previous to dwell in the land and city of Nephi-Lehi, only to discover that they were living in the land of Shilem, near the borders of the land. Limhi tells Ammon that he and his people have been in bondage to the Lamanites because his grandfather King Zanath had yielded to the demands of King Laman. King Noah had fallen into transgression, whereby the Lord suffered that this great evil should come upon them, in having put to death the prophet Abinadi. The Lord told King Limhi more than likely through the prophet Abinadi that if my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the chaff. And before the prison, if my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the east wind, which bringeth immediate destruction. So this east wind idea actually really works very well in the heartland of America, as you have these hurricanes that travel in from the east and go out to the north, and of course they're hurricane force winds, so they bring immediate destruction. Anyway, so there we go. There was a few others. Let's see. I think that was pretty much the talking about that. The whirlwinds, the shafts in the whirlwind. We talked all about that. And we're going to talk about the bison. We're going to be talking about elephants. We're going to be talking about horses and wolves and dogs and all of these different animals and cows, and what that all means in the Book of Mormon, and is there any indications of the climate of the Book of Mormon based on the animals and the plants that are found there. Listen, everybody, I hope you're enjoying this. Have a great day, and hopefully this is helping you to enhance your study of the Book of Mormon. And for me personally, I just hope that it helps you to understand and realize that these prophets in the Book of Mormon wrote these things down from their experience. Joseph Smith then had to take those things and translate them into English and put them into the Book of Mormon, which we have. There are very specific words like driven wind, like carried away in a tornado, phrases that are unique to any other scripture that are not found anywhere else in any of the Old Testament, New Testament of the Bible. They are unique to the Book of Mormon because they are a direct translation. There was not other people involved, and God was involved specifically with the translation. So when it says these specific words, they mean something, and that's the reason why we have to take them very seriously. What they're talking about with even like the east wind. I mean, this only makes sense in certain geographic locations. I have found my testimony of the Book of Mormon continuing to grow. There's been many times when we didn't know where if there was going to be an answer to certain things. When I first started the research and people said, well, what about snow? My answer was, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why it doesn't mention snow. But now what I usually say when people ask me, so why doesn't it mention snow in the Book of Mormon? I say, well, if it happened down in Central America, why doesn't it mention rain? and that usually kind of, makes the whole thing go away. Weather is not that important to the teachings and the gospel that are in the Book of Mormon, but it was something that they experienced, and they couldn't help but have some of that bleed over into an understanding of the geography of the Book of Mormon and why it happened here in North America. Thanks, everybody. Don't miss the next one. It's going to be awesome. And I want to thank Legacy Tours and Travel for their support here. And also, if you like to get more information, let me get to that really quickly here. Okay, just about there. Okay. So that's bookofmormonevidence.org is our prime website. You can find everything from there. We have our supplemental podcasts. A lot of people have been confused about, okay, so we have a streaming website, we have these podcasts and so forth, and which is which, and what does that mean? And bottom line is, so we have a lot of these podcasts that we've done. Now, as you know, this year we have not opted to follow the Come Follow Me program of the church, because we did that 4 years ago, and that information is still just as valid. So we invite you to go back and follow this. It's interesting because this shows, that there wasn't very many followers at the time. We actually had a different media company, and we had almost 1 million hits or 1 million views or something, and then we lost all those when we moved it over to the current YouTube channel. So we have a Book of Mormon Answers. That's if you have questions about the Book of Mormon, you can go to our website and go to Book of Mormon Answers. That is going to be revamped and go along with the book that is going to be coming out that Ryan has been working on, Ryan Nelson. We have self-guided videos and tours. The streaming website, though, brothers and sisters, is really, if you like what we're doing here, we have not directly asked for donations from people to support our work here and what we're doing. We have done it primarily just by having books and DVDs and things like that people can purchase, and we fund this by the purchasing of those items. So we haven't asked specifically for donations. But if you would like to help support us in our research here at the Firm Foundation and Legacy Research and our podcasts and so forth here, the best way to support us actually is to become a streaming client, okay, the streaming supporter. Go to our Book of Mormon Evidence streaming website. I think it's like $8 a month or something like that, and you can do it in a year, so you can get the best price. There's quite a number of benefits. It's the largest repository of information and research that's ever been assembled on the Book of Mormon, and also other topics that are of interest to Book of Mormon enthusiasts. So like science and religion, things like constitutional studies, things like world events and self-reliance and those kinds of things. There's almost 1,700 one-hour presentations on all of those different subjects, but primarily it's about probably 65 or 70% of the presentations are in fact on the Book of Mormon. The largest information reserve on the Book of Mormon that's ever been assembled, and we're excited about that. If you'd like to support us, please do so by becoming a streaming member and support us that way. And that way we're not asking for a donation every time you turn around. Okay, so anyway, these are faithful answers to Latter-day questions about critical topics of our time, as low as $7.97 a month. And you can watch it on any device, from your phone, from your computer, from your laptop, from your tablet or whatever. Anyway, so faithful answers to Latter-day questions. This is kind of what it looks like as you go through it. We're in the process of revamping this, so you'll be able to see a lot of other additional things here. If you'd like to get a copy of the Annotated Book of Mormon, those are available at our website or also at Deseret Book. It's the #1 best-selling edition of the Book of Mormon now in Deseret Book and in the church in English, at least. And so you can pick those up. I think we have them on a special right now. Instead of $69.95, I think they're like $59 or something. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, but you can get a special deal on that. It's the first ever red letter edition of the Book of Mormon. It's awesome stuff. And again, that's our website, bookofmormonevidence.org. There's my email, and my that phone number is no longer valid. But anyway, and we will catch you on the flip side. Let's take a pause, and then next week you will see the new podcast on the animals and plants that indicate weather and climate in the Book of Mormon. Thanks, everybody.